And we're still waiting for Gina and Sheila to join.
Okay, no problem. I'm pretty sure you have to. I didn't go to the earlier session, so I had some time to like look at the Zoom link and all that stuff. So I'm pretty sure your mom is like all kind of.
Oh, there's a lot of people that, right, and then last person.
Unmute, start my video. We're all here?
Well, I'm still waiting for Sheila.
Yeah, we're waiting for Sheila to show up. Okay. So that was pretty seamless. I'm hoping everybody is kind of making their way and maneuvering. That Dina Simmons was like half an hour is just not enough time. Hey, Sheila. So Sheila's here.
All right, so should I admit everyone else?
Yeah, you can start to admit folks. You can introduce us or introduce the event. All right, awesome. We're in here. Confronting the Costs. Okay, technology. Wow, we have a nice group of people in here. All right, well, we're going to get started because 40 minutes is just not enough time. I happen to be one of the session speakers. Again, my name is Gina Parker Collins. I am an independent school mom, independent school leader, and founder of Resources in Independent School Education. And I'm on fire from Dina Simmons, but we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty right here about the costs. And so why don't my co-speakers introduce themselves? I'm going to put myself on mute for a second and let's get started. All right.
Sure, I'll go first. I'll just pop right in. I'm Sheila Hicks-Rotella. I am the Director of Financial Aid at Riverdale Country School. This is the end of my 10th year there. I'm also the Associate Director of Middle and Upper School Admissions. So I've done a lot of work with kids in grades 6 through 12, kind of coming into the school. I've also done quite a bit of work with our students coming into pre-K through 5th grade there as well. Before I came to Riverdale, I was at the Bush School out in Seattle for a few years working in admissions and diversity, and between my 2 independent school experiences, I got my master's degree in school leadership from the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. But I'm also at a moment of transition, and I will be moving on to the Hackley School, Hackley School in Westchester in about a month, which is pretty wild after so many wonderful years with amazing Riverdale parents like Gina. So I'm going to miss working with all of my families. I think as the Director of Financial Aid and someone who's in the admission office, you get to know not just students the way that sometimes our great educators get to know the students very well, but you really get to know the parents very well too. So it's certainly a bittersweet transition. I'll direct you to Lauren next.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren D. Lewis, and I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion and Senior Associate Director of Enrollment and Financial Aid at Foxcroft School. We are located in Middleburg, Virginia. We are a boarding and day school. So we're located about 43 miles outside of DC. This is my 12th year, just wrapping up my 12th year in admissions. But I actually started my career as a social worker, so I am a social worker. And prior to that, I was a graduate at a day school in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I thought that my work with social work would dovetail beautifully with admissions and wanting to give back to families and students of color. So I actually started up in the ranks as an admission assistant and moved all the way from various roles to associate director to director of admission and financial aid. So this is my 7th school. I've worked at 5 boarding schools and 2 day schools. So I know a little bit about with financial aid and with the topic at hand. So I'm just so happy and blessed to be amongst these women, and also just to be in a great space with families, especially given the time that we're in right now.
So the title of this session is Confronting the Costs. And that's all of them. There's that financial aspect. there's the social aspect, and the emotional aspect. And I want to talk about all of them. You know, if you were on with Dina Simmons, oh, Ronaldo, I'm so glad you made it in. Okay, great. We're going to address your question a little bit. So let's talk about that. I think because we left off with Dina talking a lot about, you know, what we can gain and what we can lose in our experience, socially and emotionally, let's get right into the fiduciary part, the financials part, the money, the investment, what it costs to attend an independent school, and how that can look differently depending on what your income looks like. And Sheila, I think you're the perfect person to kind of like kick this off. And if you can do so, you know, also in a way of how to approach that financial aspect, you know, maybe even from the beginning of thinking about an independent school. I always tell families, and you might not agree with this, don't worry about the money, figure it out after you get in.
I would agree with you, Gina. I would say don't worry about the money for the most part. Maybe I 90% agree with you. So don't worry about the money for the most part. The thing that I worry about for families is, you know, I'm working at a school in the New York City area. I know we might have families coming from all over now as RISE has a larger and larger reach, but our schools are, to be frank, we have pretty high tuitions, you know. There are certainly families all over the New York City area whose total household income is less than our tuition. And that's the same when we look at our boarding schools and we look at many of our good schools around the country. So it can be daunting to look at a school, see these beautiful websites, see these beautiful buildings and great things about curriculum, and then to look at a tuition that might be for some families more than their total salary, more than their take home, 50%, what have you, large numbers. And so I agree with Gina in that don't worry about the money part. I don't want anyone to say, I looked at the school, it looks beautiful. I talked to someone at the RISE fair, it, you know, spoke to my heart. I can see my child there, and I love what they're doing about the curriculum. I'm not going to apply, it's too expensive. Or I'm not going to apply, I'm never going to qualify for financial aid. And to that degree, I say, you know, certainly think about finances. This is going to be a sacrifice for your family, most likely through a process. Even if you receive financial aid, it's going to still be leaving you paying something, and it's going to be probably something that for your family is a sacrifice. But I want you to know that many of our schools desperately want students and families who are receiving financial aid to come to our schools. We have robust financial aid budgets. We know that when we have socioeconomic diversity in our schools, we get diversity of all types. We get diversity of having, you know, starving artists, the quote unquote starving artists as a part of our parent body that perhaps we couldn't if everyone was paying full tuition. That might allow us to have, you know, racial and ethnic diversity that we couldn't have. It might be family structure diversity, that when a single mom isn't going to make as much money as two people together all the time, right? So our schools have financial aid for a reason, and that reason is we don't want everyone there to be simply limited to the families who can afford the full tuition without any assistance, right? When I look at a school like Riverdale, we're offering more than $10 million of financial aid. So it's a lot of money. It is often one of the major line items in a school's budget, okay? It's one of the top things we're spending money on at many of our schools is financial aid. We want to find families who are great fits for our school who need financial aid. So please don't look at those numbers on the websites and say, we're not going to go for it. Now, you will go through the application process and a financial aid process. And you know, certainly these are competitive processes, right? We know that. We know that, unfortunately, we're not at a position either admission-wise or financial aid-wise, just say, you know, open door, anyone who wants, first come, first serve, right? And so, you know, certainly as you continue work with RISE, as you go to your next session after this, be thinking about what does that look like on the admission side of things. Here in New York, we are usually starting our admission process and our financial aid process just after Labor Day in September the year before. So if your child is going into pre-K right now this September, then this is when you would start the application process in September for them to go to kindergarten. So it is very early. I have people call all the time this time of the year in May and June. Hey, I want to talk about September, about admission, about financial aid. And it's like, I am so sorry. You are way too late for this September. You're a little bit early for next September in a good way. So if you're thinking about your child entering a school in the 2021 school year, you are right on time. When you do your admission process, you're going to be doing your financial aid process at that same time generally. Most schools in New York are going to be having those deadlines due in December. I know around the country, sometimes they might be a little later in January, maybe even February in some areas, but they're going to be asking you to do a financial aid application. Usually that's going to be the SSS, the TADS form, but some schools have a different form. Usually that's a third-party application. So usually it's not that you're just submitting your financial information directly to the school, you're submitting it to another entity. That entity is kind of taking the numbers and almost like the IRS or something, they're running it through a rubric, through a system. And that system is saying, this family makes, this much money, but this much is available for tuition. It's not going to be the same amount. I'll have families call and say, I make so much money, I'll never qualify for financial aid. We're not looking for your income to be, less than tuition for you to qualify. We know that you need to pay your taxes, you need to feed your children, you need to pay your rent, all of those things before you can get to the point of paying tuition at our school. So these application processes are coming up with a number for us on our side of the schools to say, okay, here's the XYZ family, they can afford $5,000 in tuition for the year. They can afford $40,000 in tuition for the year. If that number is less than full tuition at that school, that means that you qualify for financial aid. So all of this is supposed to be happening in December and January, oftentimes after you might have come for an interview, after you've applied. And we're doing all this at that time because the goal is for us to let you know when we let your child know if they're admitted. And here in New York City, we have a SAGNY that kind of tells us this is the day you send out for kindergarten, this is the day you send out for 6th grade. But we want to let you know when you get that happy letter, congratulations, Elon's admitted to Riverdale. I'm talking about ancient history now, right, Gina? That along with
I have a different type of tuition. I got
right, a different type. But that along with that information, there's also information about financial aid, whether you've received it or not. And sometimes schools will put you on a waiting list for financial aid and say, you qualify, but we don't have the money for you right now. Because even with a school with a $10 million budget, and that's on the larger side for independent schools, even that runs out. It's alarming. I would never think in any situation that you could run through $10 million in a year, but an independent school financial aid, that can happen. You also might get a do not qualify letter that says basically, whatever that number is that my application told me, that number was actually more than tuition. That number might have been, you can actually afford $100,000 in tuition. And that's not what our tuition is. So you don't qualify. Of course, you applied, so you were looking for it. You wouldn't have applied if you thought you didn't need it. And then also you can get a letter saying that you have an award. And then that award could be anywhere from, nearly full tuition or full tuition to a small award that, leaves you with still tens of thousands of dollars. That should be based on your need. So, you can have families that have a very strong income, executive level income, and are receiving financial aid because their ability to pay might be a lot of money, $30,000, $40,000. That's a lot of money. If you have that available after you feed your children and pay your taxes, that's a very good thing. That's still going to mean that for most independent schools in New York City, for most boarding schools, that you can qualify for financial aid. Okay, so it's important to not take yourself out because you can only afford $30,000. Don't take yourself out of the running for one of these schools.
Go through the process. So Lauren, thank you for that. So Lauren, why don't you talk about, and then we're going to get into questions really soon, and I'm kind of taking over the session keeper. Elijah, you are still a session keeper, so I'm going to stop trying to moderate at the same time, okay, Elijah? So this whole COVID thing, it's been a game changer. It's a game changer for a lot of families, who are currently enrolled right now, and their financial needs are different. What is that looking like for, because this is like an admissions-based conversation. What is that looking like for families who will be applying? Will there be less aid to give out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it just really depends on each school. And it really first starts with a conversation with the admissions office or whoever is dealing with financial aid. If that means the admissions office or the business office, it really depends on the school. For us at Foxcroft, it's actually, they will be calling, families will be calling our office, but there is a partnership between us and the business office, crunching numbers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, they will need to distribute some type of need and being able to have a narrative to say, yes, this is going on. I've lost my job, or, it's and it looks like that I probably won't get a job in the next couple of months. And we've had those conversations. So depending on the school, I know for us, we are just looking at increasing the financial aid for that family. Obviously, they will need to have a distributive need, right? But then there are some other schools that have emergency budgets, hardship budgets that are outside of the financial aid. So that's a whole separate process. So it just really depends on the school. Again, you have to have communication with the school, because if you are silent, then the school will automatically think that you can be able to pay. And you can't be silent at this time. You need to be able to speak up. And of course, with financial aid, a lot of times with schools, financial aid just only covers the cost of tuition typically, right? So you'll have to look at, there's other fees. So like if your child is going to athletics, right? Or technology fee, or yes, fees when it comes to weekends, et cetera, right? So you'll definitely have to take that into consideration. And then also, I would like to touch upon like the social emotional piece when it comes to financial aid. I had a conversation with a parent last week, and she was concerned about school opening. She wanted to know, our plans. And within the conversation, I think 5 times she said, I am really generous and I'm very happy about this award. I'm very thankful and I'm very happy that you gave us this award, but whatever. Again, she said, I'm just so thankful. I'm just so thankful. I want families to understand that you are a gift to the school, right? And not the other way around.
Amen. Amen.
So once you get that in mind, then you can say, you know what? Even though the school granted me this aid, I'm a gift to the school, and I was needed, and I was accepted along with everyone else along with this process. So I think that is very important, especially given the times that we're in right now. I want families to know that they are a gift, and because it's the social emotional piece, you have lots of tolls that are taking on that you have to navigate during your time at independent schools. So within that piece, I think that's key.
There's 20 minutes remaining.
Okay, great. So we're going to get into questions here. Please post more questions. I just wanted to add, as we go into the first question, I've never said this to you. Full disclosure, Sheila is an administrator at my school, and I know I owe you something, Sheila. So I forgot about it, but I'm gonna get on it today, because I am a financial aid family. I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm actually. So here's what I've never really said verbally in front of an administrator, but I don't care. I'm gonna say it right now. I look at financial aid. I am proud to receive financial aid. There's just one word: reparations. That's all I have to say. Okay, that's all I gotta say. So I mean, it's based on my need, but I'm not shamed by it, because I think we don't need to add that to the social and emotional cost of an independent school, right? So I have just as much standing and voice and visibility as my peer family who can afford $52,000 a year. God bless them. So let's get into some questions. Do you want to ask the questions, Elijah?
Yeah, sure. So the first question is, given the range of what families can afford, are admissions a need blind process?
Good question.
Great question. Sheila, you want to go ahead?
Why don't I start? You fill in the blanks. I always say that most schools, and there are a few exceptions, admissions is need like this. Like, we don't want to know. We don't want to know. We don't want to know. And then at the end, we have to know. So I would say at most schools, your admission file is read completely separate from your financial aid file. They're going through, they're figuring out, is this child a fit? Do we have a spot for them? Because you could be amazing, and we just can't take another 3rd grade boy right now. And then at the end, what does this child need, and do we have the funding for that? I would say most schools kind of do things more or less in that order. And then again, are trying to get that decision to you. Yes, you're in. No, we don't have money. Yes, you're in. Here's the money. Oh, that's not what you asked for, but this is what we think you should have. that sort of thing. At the end of the day, I think, there is a truth to, we all have budgets. Those budgets can be large and generous and amazing, but are still finite. So there will come a point at even sometimes the most resource schools where they simply say, we do not have the funding for this child at that time. And sometimes I see that also with the late, application. Sometimes someone calls in August, hey, guess what? It's your lucky day. So-and-so just moved away in August. We just found out there's a spot. Oh, but there isn't funding in August. There's only funding in January, which I think really behooves families seeking financial aid to apply in the first round, to make sure that their financial aid information is complete and together in the first round, and nothing is late. Anything else to add, Lauren?
I think I'm wondering if we should these questions are really coming in. I'm wondering maybe if you should just take the next question, Lauren.
Yep, no worries.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
The next question is also, is there a rubric / formula families should be figuring out for the investment family can prepare for?
That's a good question as well. So in terms of whatever platform that you apply, whether that be SSS, FACS, TADS, there is a rubric that they use within that system. It formulates and imputes a number that you will receive. So for example, for SSS, it's the parent financial statement, and then it imputes the EFC, estimated financial cost. So if for some reason you see that, and because we see that, you'll be able to get a copy of that, and an award is given, and you say, you know what, this does not fit within my means. This is when you'll need to have a conversation with the admissions office, and this is when you'll have to have that narrative with them and say, yes, I understand that this number was imputed, but this is actually what's going on. So this is when we will ask you, hey, can you be able to direct a letter to the admissions office and state like a breakdown when it comes to your finances? So rent, mortgage, like electricity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then that way we can be able to have a clear understanding of what's going on. So again, if you are silent, then we are unable to have that communication and that conversation with you.
All right. The question: if this work is important, should schools have financial assistance specifically for families of color?
I guess, should we just go on back and forth? I think there are probably schools that do. Remember, we are independent schools. So one of the great things is that we are independent in our processes. Oftentimes we share financial aid applications, and that you do one SSS and goes to multiple schools, or one TADS goes to multiple schools. But what happens after that, the individual priorities of the school, how much they have, if they're saying, I've known there are schools sometimes who say, we just don't have the resources to fully fund students going into nursery school, or to fully fund students going into kindergarten, because we have so many years with them. We just don't have those resources. We put those resources in the middle school and high school. So every school kind of has to figure out their own way of looking at the numbers that you give them. You're giving them the same numbers, but they have their own reasoning behind what happens next.
I see the next question was answered by Gina in the comments, so I'm gonna go over that one. And the next question is there ever room for families to negotiate with the schools about the financial aid packages received? How does one find out if the reason has students of color is driven by financial aid is creating an environment where everyone knows that the only reason your Black child is there is because of financial aid, and in parentheses, treats them as such?
Oh, can I take that one?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know what? No matter.
I think the first part of it. Sorry, this is B. I asked the question. I think the first question was answered in the response earlier, but the second question, I'm still interested in hearing the response about.
Okay, so just repeat that part, Beatrice.
It was kind of to understand, like, how do you find out if a school mostly has its students of color because they're offering them financial aid, and so like it becomes this unspoken knowledge.
Oh, okay, yeah, so that's what I thought it was. Listen, it's no matter, they're always going to think you're on financial aid anyway, so it doesn't even matter. I mean, I know plenty of full paid Black and brown families who most people still think it's just what people think, but who cares? I don't care. Honestly, it means nothing to me whether or not you think my child is on financial aid, because even if we weren't, you would think we were anyway. So my goal is to focus on what it is that I can do to help create and disrupt, because that's systemic. That's systemic. That's institutional. And there's nothing I can, I'm not going to take on that burden, but I will disrupt it. I will disrupt it by actually saying, I don't care if I'm paying $1, if I'm paying 10,000 or 100,000, my voice still matters. So I'm still going to have voice and visibility. You're still going to hear from me. I'm going to still partner with my school. So I think it's our own mindset. You're going to fall back because of that, or you're going to, I deserve to be here. I have an inheritance here. And perhaps you might even look at it as a reparation. All right, what's the next one? And I know we're running kind of fast with this, but we're going to have to, be gone soon. And if we do not cover all of the questions, we will post these answers in our post-event follow-up. But I thank you for the questions.
I have a question specifically for Sheila and Lauren, and they ask, can you please share the most important factors, criteria, measures used to determine acceptance of a student?
Can you repeat that question?
Is this a financial question?
It says, well, it has to do with the acceptance of the students, like how you determine the acceptance of the students.
Okay. Well, for us, the reason why I'm signed, because again, and I hate to, well, I don't really hate to say this, but it just really depends on the school, right? And I think that you will need to have that conversation when you initially inquire or apply to that school. That's a great question to ask early on. What are you looking for in an applicant? What is your student body? There are schools that look at test scores. There are schools that look at the application holistically. We look at the application holistically. So we look at the application, we look at the interview, the recommendation letters, testing, the writing sample. So it just really, really depends on the school. But again, having those conversations early on with the admissions office and saying, what are you looking for? And to the point in terms of with financial aid, especially if it's late in the game, because some families don't know. This may be their first time applying, right? And they probably missed that first round. And again, that's that conversation that you'll have with the admissions office and say, hey, do you have financial aid available? I had a family ask me that, and I said, unfortunately, we're fully funded. All of our funds have been allocated for the year, right? So again, just really having that conversation, that dialogue. A lot of times it's on the website, so you can be able to look at it on the website. But if it's not clear, pick up the phone, send an email, so that way you can say what's the criteria.
There's 10 minutes left, and
Okay.
Next question is financial aid determined annually?
It's a quick one. Yes, it is. So every year your school is going to ask you to reevaluate. That's really important because I mean, if you're at a K-12 school or pre-K through 12 school like Riverdale is, a lot of things are going to happen. You could add triplets to the mix, and that's going to push up your need. So we do ask you to do the information again every year just to check in.
The next question. Can you speak to the parameters of a contract a family enters in March? What is legally binding between school and family for the year?
The parameters of a contract a family enters in March.
Contact.
So that's going to depend from school to school, right? We're independent schools for a reason. For the most part, independent schools in New York are going to be asking you to sign a contract, and that is to say, I'm coming to the school, right? So it's not just like, hey, we'd like you to come. All right, I'll let you know in September if I show up or not. It's saying contract, yes, I'm coming. And along with that, whatever it is that you're paying, whether it's full tuition, whether it's $500 for the year, that I expect to pay that. And there's how the other details are going to depend by school. There's everything from by signing this, you're allowing us to put your child's picture on the website, to by signing this, you understand that if you break any school rules, you've broken the contract, and we can say we can terminate this. All of that language will be in the contract. So I always say my granddaddy couldn't write or read. He made his mark on forms. And so for that reason, I will sit there and I will be that annoying person like, I'm sorry, I have to read the whole contract. I might not even understand everything, but I'm going to read every part of the contract and I will ask you questions. And you have every right to do that. And I think you should if you enter that contract with the school. You will also generally be asked to do that contract each year. So each year, your school is asking you to file your financial aid again, they're giving you financial aid, and they're asking you again, all right, we're still bonded to each other.
The next question is, my son has been enrolled in independent school since pre-K 3 to 3 in a school that does not grant financial aid in the nursery school. I'm assuming that is to ensure that a family can afford the annual tuition. What if circumstances change? What is the importance of retaining a family's enrollment in the school?
Sheila, I almost think this is good for you too, because I think we've seen that happen at, at Riverdale, where, nursery pre-K did not have any financial aid, but we switched that. It was switched to create more equity, right?
Yeah, and more socioeconomic diversity in all of our grades. So in short, I would say most schools will look at you for financial aid from one year to the next if there's been a change in circumstance. Many schools, not all, will have some sort of criteria around we're not just going to grant financial aid without a change in circumstance. By that, I mean, because depending on the school, schools can be more or less need aware. So there are schools where perhaps kid A got in part because of who they were and they did not need financial aid. And if they had been kid B with all the same academic attributes, but needed financial aid, there wouldn't have been an ability to give them that aid. So many schools will say, you can't come in one year and then the next year be like, just kidding, we borrowed money for that year. We will need financial aid for the next 12 years. They are often going to ask you to show us what has changed. It's totally fine if you came into pre-K 3 and the next year someone lost their job, but they want to see that. Some schools will say that's going to depend not just from one year to the next as far as change. I've seen schools ask you for the next division. You came in at pre-K 3 for nursery. It's not until 6th grade that we will offer you financial aid. Or, you came in at pre-K 3, it's going to be 3 years until we can offer you financial aid. So it's important for you to understand that as you go in, but always, especially if there's been a change, even if this goes against the policy, don't ask, don't get. So if someone lost their job, even if you're not supposed to be allowed to get aid until 6th grade, at least go in there and give them the information because you don't know. And I would say, especially because of COVID, I think all of our schools are very aware of that. And many schools have, as Lauren said, these separate funds and are trying to be extra generous and kind of go outside the normal policies to help families.
The next question is, do K through 12 schools take funds from 529 plans?
Again, it depends on the school. We do not take that into consideration at Foxcroft, but I know some schools that do. So again, you'll need to ask the school again early on when you're applying for financial aid if they take that into consideration.
It's around about to be 5 minutes left, and then there's a question that it says, Sheila, isn't it true that the private day and private independent board schools will continue to invest a family and student for the duration of their learning up to graduation as long as the family/student is in good standing?
So I think what the question is it true that the family will continue to receive aid? And I would say usually, but it's not just about good standing. So this is why we ask you to reapply every year. I've been blessed to see families where, like, you got another job, like, you were started out as med student, now you're a doctor, now she's a doctor, now we're taking off, and how that income will change over time. So you definitely shouldn't go in and say, no matter what else happens, they're asking us for 10,000 and it's going to be 10,000 for the next 4 years and next 13 years. That need is going to be dynamic. That being said, if your situation stays mostly the same, you get a 5% raise, tuition goes up 4%, you're probably going to have your $10,000 go up 5%. That's not going to probably change, your ability to pay from year to year. So I hope that makes sense.
There is no other questions, so not sure.
You know what? I'm typing into Beatrice right now. She clarified what I didn't hear, which was more about, I might walk around saying, listen, I have no problem being on financial aid, but perhaps my children might have an issue about that. Well, again, it's like, what are we pouring into our children? Are we reminding them, first of all, of who they are? I mean, they definitely will see that there are certain people that seem to appear to have more money than others. But one of the things that I've always told my children is like, well, wow, I wonder what it takes to get that. What does that take away from the family? Like, do they eat dinner together? They might have a nanny and a helper, but that's 3 people removed from me. Like, you have me, you have your dad, so there, you know, it's give and take. Just because there is this appearance of affluence does not mean that the family is whole and happy. And so these are the conversations we have to have with our children. You know, we have to let them know what's real and what's not, and what's important and what's not. So I still feel that it's up to the parent to be able to create a level of emotional safety and understanding the value of their cultural capital, right? Cultural capital means everything, because money can be here today and gone tomorrow. We see that in COVID right now, right? That's not forever. So I hope, raise your hand, Beatrice, was that good?
I think there's also a level of like class literacy that you know have to have, that you should have, period. And I think that being an independent school might push some families to have those discussions earlier, but I think that's a benefit, you know, to not say that you go to school with the same kids in your neighborhood that might be racially homogenous, might be socioeconomically homogenous, to say that we have more diversity within our school because it doesn't matter where you come from as long as you can get here today or get here for the year if you're boarding school. And so I think, you know, you're going to have conversations with your children that you might not have had if every kid was just like your family or just like the kids in your neighborhood. And I think that's really a gift. But sometimes it's going to mean leaning into things that could be, you know, a little different. Some of us might have had that class conversation going to college. My mom talks about not knowing she was poor because she went to a segregated school. And her sister on the other side of the 60s didn't go to segregated school and suddenly knew people had colored televisions. And that was wild. So these are not new questions or concerns or parts of parenthood. They're actually old ones, just brought up new with every new generation.